Imagine trusting your employer completely, believing that everything they tell you about your job, your pay, your responsibilities, and your rights is accurate, only to slowly realize that some of it doesn't add up. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that immediately raises alarms, but in small, subtle inconsistencies that you brush off at first. Maybe it's the way overtime is explained to you, or how certain policies are enforced differently depending on the situation. Maybe it's the feeling that something isn't fair, but you can't quite prove it. This is where many employees find themselves, stuck between what they are told and what is actually true. And in that gap, your power is quietly taken away. The truth is, not every employer is completely transparent about employee rights. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's just part of how systems are built, but either way, the result is the same. Employees operate with limited knowledge, and that limitation benefits the employer. Because when you don't fully understand your rights, you are less likely to question decisions, less likely to push back, and more likely to accept situations that may not be legal at all. But the moment you begin to question, to verify, and to understand the law for yourself, everything starts to shift. One of the biggest areas where misinformation happens is pay. Many employees assume their paycheck is correct simply because it comes from the company. But wage laws in the United States are very specific. You are entitled to be paid for every hour you work, and in many cases, you are entitled to overtime pay when you exceed certain limits. Yet, employees are often told things like, "This role doesn't qualify for overtime," or "You're expected to finish the work no matter how long it takes." These statements may sound normal, but they don't override the law. If you are working extra hours without proper compensation, that is not just unfair. It may be illegal. Another area where the truth is often blurred is job classification. Some employees are labeled as independent contractors instead of employees, which changes the entire structure of their rights and benefits. Employers may present this as a standard arrangement, but misclassification can strip you of protections like minimum wage, overtime, and certain legal safeguards. What many people don't realize is that simply being told you are a contractor doesn't automatically make it legal. The law looks at the nature of your work, your level of control, and your relationship with the company. If those factors point toward employee status, then calling you a contractor may be a violation. Then there are workplace policies, rules that are presented as absolute, as if they cannot be questioned. Employers may say, "This is company policy," and expect that to end the conversation. But policies do not override the law. A company cannot create a rule that allows discrimination, ignores safety standards, or denies legally required pay. If a policy conflicts with the law always takes priority. Understanding this changes how you see workplace rules. Instead of viewing them as fixed and unchallengeable, you begin to see them as something that must align with legal standards. Retaliation is another area surrounded by fear and misinformation. Employees are often made to believe that speaking up will lead to consequences, losing hours, being treated differently, or even losing their job. While retaliation does happen, it is also illegal. The law protects your right to report issues like harassment, discrimination, unsafe conditions, or wage violations. If your employer punishes you for doing so, that punishment becomes a legal issue on its own. This is one of the most powerful protections you have, but it only works if you know it exists. Without that knowledge, fear takes over, and silence becomes the default response. Harassment is often minimized in the workplace, especially when it doesn't appear extreme. Employees may be told to ignore it or not take it personally, even when the behavior is repeated and uncomfortable. But harassment doesn't have to be extreme to be illegal. When behavior becomes persistent or creates a hostile environment, it crosses a legal line. Employers have a responsibility to address these situations, and failing to do so can make them accountable. The idea that you just have to tolerate it is one of the biggest misconceptions employees face. Another critical issue is wrongful termination. Many people believe that if they are fired, that's the end of the story. They assume the employer has complete control over that decision. While it's true that many jobs are at will, meaning an employer can terminate employment without giving a reason, there are important limits. An employer cannot fire you for discriminatory reasons, for reporting illegal activity, or for exercising your rights. If your termination is connected to any of these factors, it may not be legal. But if you don't know these limits, you may never question the decision. There is also the issue of pressure. Subtle, but powerful. Pressure to sign documents quickly, pressure to accept new terms, pressure to stay quiet. Employers may create a sense of urgency, making it seem like you don't have time to think or ask questions. But you always have the right to understand what you are agreeing to. Whether it's a contract, a policy update, or a waiver, your signature should never be given without clarity. The moment you slow down and ask questions, you take back control. What ties all of these situations together is one simple but powerful idea: the difference between what you are told and what is legally true. That difference is where confusion lives, where doubt grows, and where rights are often lost. But it's also where awareness begins. Because once you start questioning, once you start learning, and once you start verifying information, that gap begins to close. And as it closes, your confidence grows. Documentation becomes your strongest ally in this process. Every email, every message, every instruction, every unusual situation, it all matters. When something feels off, writing it down and saving evidence can make a huge difference later. It turns your experience into something tangible, something that can be reviewed, understood, and acted upon. Without documentation, even valid concerns can become difficult to prove. With it, your position becomes much stronger. Taking action doesn't always mean going straight into a legal battle. It means understanding your options. It means knowing when to raise a concern internally, when to seek outside help, and when to consult someone who understands the law. There are agencies, professionals, and systems in place to support you, but the first step always comes from you, recognizing that something isn't right and deciding not to ignore it. What truly changes everything is your mindset. The moment you stop assuming that your employer is always right and start understanding that the law exists to protect you, your perspective shifts. You become more aware, more confident, and more willing to stand up for yourself. You stop accepting everything at face value and start asking, is this actually legal? And that question alone can change the course of your entire work experience. Your employer may have authority, but that authority is not absolute. It is limited by law, and those limits are there to protect you. When those limits are crossed, you have the right to respond. Not later, not eventually, but in many cases, immediately. The challenge is not in having rights, it's in recognizing when they apply. So, if you've ever felt like something wasn't right, like you were being told only part of the truth, or like you didn't have enough information to question a decision, trust that instinct. Because often, that feeling is the first sign that something deserves a closer look. And the moment you start looking, learning, and understanding, you take back the power that was never meant to be taken from you in the first place. Remember this: your employer may not always tell you everything, but the law is still there, working in your favor. Your rights don't disappear just because you're unaware of them. They remain, waiting for you to recognize them, understand them, and use them. And once you do, everything changes. How you see your job, how you respond to challenges, and how you protect yourself moving forward.